Hi all, this is a great conference. I'm Ken Jaffe. I raised grass-fed beef in Meredith for the past 9 years, and before that I practiced family medicine in Brooklyn for 25 years, and before that I was, a little before that I was a student at Binghamton University, which was so long ago, I think it was before the Marcellus Shale was formed. But the reason I was asked to come here today was to tell a story about how we replaced town government in Meredith. Unfortunately, the story is in PowerPoint. So we had a problem in 2005 where there was a threat to put up hundreds of 400 plus foot industrial wind turbines in Meredith. And whatever you think about wind power, there are siting issues, and the siting issues made it really too much of a threat to public health, safety, and the quality of life in Meredith. So a group of people came together and basically developed an electoral strategy. So the running of the campaign, I would say, is pretty similar to what would have to happen with gas drilling, although the legal status of industrial wind development it's really all a home rule issue, and there's none of this ambiguity about preemption. So the starting point was that the town board, 5 members, were strongly in favor of industrial wind development. There were members on the board with conflicts of interest. They had signed contracts with wind developers or were interested in signing contracts. The people in the town were not well informed, and I'd say the default position, even amongst the activists who fought this initially, and certainly amongst most town people, was that, oh, wind, this must be wonderful, until you actually found out the reality of what was going to be going on. The activists tended to be people like me who were transplants. And there was a split between the old timers and the new timers, which I think is something that may go on with gas drilling as well. Part of it was along social class lines. The anti-wind activists were, I would say, in general, had more education. Meredith was a town that was predominant, as in Delaware County, everywhere in Delaware County, was predominantly Republican registration. Although, interestingly, Meredith did have a history of electing Democratic supervisors for reasons that are not entirely clear. Meredith has no zoning, and it turns out that the absence of zoning appears not to be an impediment to banning an industrial activity. I'm sure there are lawyers in this audience who may have something to say about that, but that was the advice that we certainly got from multiple sources, and that was, certainly didn't keep us from writing a ban ultimately that was never challenged. So we formed an organization. It was a 501c4, which is a not-for-profit, can take donations and spend money. They're not tax-deductible donations, but nobody seemed to care. It's an educational entity which is allowed to participate in advocacy for legislation. Its primary purpose cannot be to finance a political candidate. So there's a little kind of mushiness there. We had a steering committee of about a dozen members. There were 4 or 5 who were kind of obsessive and like me, and but the others included people who were really critical, somebody with design skills who could help with designing posters and layouts for newsletters, who maybe never showed up at meetings but could knock that out in a half an hour when it would take us forever to do it, the people without the skills. We tried to get a broad representation of constituencies, but in terms of demographically, but it was not so easy to do. Although my personal experience was there was one person who was an old-timer in the town, and when she joined very early on, when she joined this 2-year battle, when she joined our steering committee, I felt like we had totally turned the corner and we could make it. We had a web design pro bono. We had a board of directors, which was 3 people. In theory, it's supposed to have bylaws if you have a 501c4. We actually never got that together. We did buy directors and officers insurance, which, considering, personally, I would be nervous about being in an organization like this without some protection. Because I think lawsuits in this area are not going after deep pockets, they're just going after intimidation. And having some insurance does protect against that. So we got a P.O. box, a bank account, and 2 signers, so nobody can embezzle all our huge amounts of money. So it was pretty clear early on that, that this was going to have to be an electoral strategy. And it was also clear that the town was not really on board, but they also were not informed, so it was going to be a big educational process. And it was also pretty clear this was going to be divisive. Even in a small town, there's 1,600 people in Meredith. It's kind of close-knit, a lot of old-time alliances and discord also. And I think in these there's a lot of role for kind of in-your-face politics in various strata, but I think, at least in Meredith, and I think a lot of small upstate towns, it's really important there's a big value on public civility, even if people don't mean it. So it really is very bad for an advocacy group if you're too in your face. It has to be kind of nice in a way. But there's still lingering problems in the town, and people still will not work with me, for instance, on issues that are of kind of mutual interest within the town, ag issues, say. So we formed the Alliance for Meredith, and we had a mission statement to preserve Meredith's rural heritage and natural environment. And we based this a lot on the comprehensive plan, which had been written a couple years earlier, which I think is an important, it's kind of a document that's usually written and sort of sits there in a drawer someplace, but it is an important statement and formed actually a basis for writing legislation. And also in the comprehensive plan was a survey of townspeople that was used to actually create the plan. And there were questions, there was a survey of questions of priorities amongst people, and the values that were placed most highly were things like preserving rural heritage and historical quality. Like 93% of people were positive on that, more than just about anything else. And also preserving air and water quality. This is like before grass drilling was even on the horizon. So, it's already probably in your comprehensive plan, someplace in a drawer, someplace. Now, other nearby towns had somewhat different experiences, or other towns not so nearby had different experiences as well. Nearby Andes and Bovina had a lot easier time than we did. There was a much higher percentage of second homeowners. And I think with a relatively small amount of outreach and public meetings, and then a petition was signed where an overwhelming majority of people signed those petitions. And I think, the town board, even though they may have been in favor of industrial wind development, sort of folded because they saw the handwriting on the wall. Other towns, like Arkwright, and towards western New York, they had some, very informed, hardworking people, and they either didn't have like a critical mass of people to work on this, and they never quite were able to get the legislation together. So we started out, first before the large community meetings, we did some direct mailings, just sort of announcing Alliance for Meredith, what we were for, very friendly, and community-oriented, trying to protect the community against, wind developers. And then, so people sort of knew we were there. And then we had a couple of large public meetings. One was in a big restaurant, and another was in a large barn space. And it was very helpful to us because it gave us, a lot of people showed up for one thing, so it gave us a sense that we were onto something. And, we had local speakers on a range of topics, and we used it for educational, for fundraising, and also people came out of the woodwork who we had no idea cared about this issue. Because largely we felt we were sort of talking to ourselves, and suddenly we were talking to a whole bunch of other people who were local who we didn't even know about. We talked a lot about economic issues, and I think in the gas drilling, this has maybe not been emphasized quite enough, just the personal negative economic effect that most people are going to experience. If you just do the arithmetic on, even if somebody's going to sign a lease, somebody has 5 to 10 acres of land, and they're going to sign a lease and get a few $1,000, and then the value of their property goes down $75,000. Hello, just people need to be told about this. It's very straightforward, actually. And I think if people are starting to question, our experience is once people started to question their personal financial effect, then the other issues started to resonate more. The environmental issues, the health issues, and the rural character issues. I would say the intensity of our opponents in this fight were less intense than in the gas drilling battle, but we tried to have Q&A where everybody got to talk and sort of tightly manage it in terms of time, so it didn't get completely out of hand, which certainly it seems like it has happened sometimes with the gas drilling events. So we advertised the meetings, and very important, refreshments served. Put up lots of ads, baked goods, informational handouts were written. We asked for money. We got the email list. Again, networking. And I think just the presence and having it run well, sort of demonstrated competence and presence, which are two pretty important things. The whole thing definitely took money. The steering committee coughed up money to get things going, so that was about $1,000 from the steering committee, and then we did stuff to raise money. We asked people for money, basically, and it was surprising how much people gave us, for a little town. Over the course of the 2 years, including all these mailings and the events and the incorporation and the insurance, it cost about $10,000. But when we started to run out, we went back and we asked the same people for more money. And they mostly gave it to us. So we had our little membership cards, check off and write a check. And so then we tried the petition route. So we went door to door, and most people signed the petition. I was sort of surprised. And it was also very informative because you heard what people had to say. It's very informative. And then when we couldn't find people, we sent the petition directly to their house with an envelope to mail it back without a stamp on it because we couldn't afford it. And we, basically divided up the town, and each person on the steering committee or somebody they could recruit had a certain number of houses to go to, and they did, and when they didn't, they got yelled at. And so we got a lot of signatures on the petition. We have 1,600 people in the town, so we got 870 signatures, and the town board just blew it off. So, the next step was to replace the town board. So we had about a year from this point, and there was a lot of, contentious town board meetings and planning board meetings, and, basically we were showing up at every meeting. You have to show up. It's the Woody Allen joke, 90% of success is showing up. So we developed a newsletter, which was kind of, and sent eight editions, which was educational / polemic / informative, and sent it out as things developed over the year. we selected candidates, and first we ran in a Democratic primary. So we tried to get multiple lines on the ballot. We got the Democratic line ultimately, we got the conservative line, believe it or not, and we created our own line, the Unity Party. And we had to create campaign materials and mailings, went door-to-door campaigning, and big turnout to vote effort. So we mailed a newsletter to every address in the town, plus all out-of-town property owners. And we had mailing parties, so everybody got together and basically stuffed envelopes. The newsletter, we tried to make it kind of newsy and non-threatening as possible, with a nice logo, with a nice, rural scene, which is what Meredith actually is like. When recruiting candidates, we definitely shied away from the most vocal and visible activists. So we tried to get people with name recognition who were already had been previous town officials, or people who were sort of known around town. Ideally people with business experience. We tried to get diversity, but we had a little trouble with that because all three people we ended up nominating were somehow related to writing, or one person ran a bookstore, or one person had been an editor. So anyhow, they were willing to work hard, and they were willing to coordinate with the activist group, and we were pretty sure they were going to follow through on writing a law, which ultimately would be up to them. Primaries, almost nobody shows up at a primary. Like 10%, maybe 25% of the electorate. So it's possible for a highly motivated activist group who's going to get out to vote to swarm the ballot box. And that's basically what we did. And by the time we ran the primary, we knew how many people we needed to win, and we knew how many people we had, because we had petitions, and we actually had data on how many votes we were going to get. And basically we just had to call people up and remind them to go out and vote. And the election in the Democratic primary was overwhelming. All these rules are very tricky, not tricky, just detailed and stupid. And so you have to follow them. Otherwise you're not going to get it up on the ballot, or somebody can challenge you and throw you off. So one of the joys of this was writing campaign material for the Conservative Party. This is it. They represent our values. Values and issues, right? Try to, get multiple, once we got the campaign going, try to not have it be a single issue. So try to work on, it wasn't just ban industrial wind, it was control the budget, it was improve our roads, which was a big issue at that point because the roads were a disaster. And then get out the vote. We registered new voters, including second homeowners, because we matched our supporters against the voter rolls, because you could find out who's registered to vote. And the people who were our supporters, who were second homeowners or who hadn't registered, we got them to register. We had one person who was in charge of absentee ballots, which is even more arcane than the regular voting rules. And the dates make no sense whatsoever. So that person was just in charge of getting the absentee ballots working properly. We had it broken down, so we had precincts, so that one person was in charge of like 30 people on election night to get out the vote. And we had phone banks running. And then on election day, it was an overwhelming victory. Like 74% of people showed up to vote, and our candidates won by close to a 2-to-1 margin. And they followed through and wrote a new law banning industrial turbines in Meredith. None of us had any real experience in electoral politics before this, so clearly a bunch of amateurs can pull this off. And I think, the election thing, it's the ban in the town is important, but I think, as Larry Bennett said, he did some lobbying at Albany, and he felt that the legislators have their finger in the air when some long-term incumbents are thrown out of office, they will feel the wind blowing. Thanks.